My guest today is Mark Evans. Mark is the founder of Marketing Spark. He is a fractional CMO and strategic advisor who helps B2B and SaaS companies make sales happen easier and faster. Today, Mark is going to dive into why brand positioning is so important and why a lot of companies drop the ball. Also, how has marketing changed for content marketers over the past 2 years due to AI? And how should companies approach it? So, aside from that, he's also going to talk about why there's so much interest in fractional CMOs and the difference between a fractional CMO and strategic advisor. Let's jump right in. Hey, Mark, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I'm excited to speak to you. We've known each other for a little while, so it's kind of nice to finally have you on.
Yeah, it's interesting how our paths have intertwined over the last few years. First on LinkedIn, and then most recently on a podcast community that we're both members of.
Yeah,
it's really nice to meet other podcasters and share the love and learn some new things along the way.
Absolutely, yeah, it's fun. It's funny how LinkedIn plays into so many relationships we have now. It's like, I don't think if it wasn't for LinkedIn, I don't think I'd have any friends. I hate to say that, but it's like I meet everyone through LinkedIn.
Well, there was this theory that at most we all had 100 friends. That was the theory. And now with LinkedIn, that number has exploded. It's just so easy to meet people if you take the time and energy to go out there and put yourself out there and introduce yourself and ask for conversations.
Yeah. And a lot of it lately has been very suspicious. Like I don't trust people as much as I used to because you connect with someone and they pitch slap you. And it's like, I'm just so tired of being pitched. It's like, just stop. Right. Which kind of brings us to, tangentially, to our subject today. We're going to talk, I'm going to have you talk because you're the expert on the brand positioning. And I wanted to ask you first, if you could define a couple of things for me. So how do you define brand positioning?
In very simple terms, brand positioning defines what you do, who you serve, the value that you deliver, and how you're unique, different, or better.
Okay.
Straightforward, to the point. It's a concept that every company should understand and embrace, but they don't.
So it's about positioning yourself in the marketplace, correct?
Exactly. Every company faces intense competition. That's a fact of life. It doesn't matter if you're selling a very niche product. We've all got competitors, direct and indirect. And the problem is, or the challenge is how do you stand out from the crowd? How do you position yourself as the obvious option when there's lots of other options out there? So every company's got to find a slant or an angle that appeals to the right person at the right time. And different people approach products in different ways, and they have different use cases and different needs. And so it's a strategic decision to say, we make this product, it delivers these benefits, and it's really awesome for these type of customers.
And it's so interesting because I have this conversation with so many people from so many different angles, from the copywriting angle, messaging, to the brand positioning. Where does brand positioning fit in with all those things? Like copywriting is part of it, messaging is part of it, or how does it all merge?
You could look at it as kind of a hierarchy. The way that I look at brand positioning, it's at the bottom of the base. It really is the place where companies establish their strategic narrative and the story that they're going to tell to the world. So you establish that base, and brand positioning, for the most part, is an internal exercise. It's a North Star for the company in terms of marketing and sales, HR, raising money, customer success. It really allows them to go forward in lockstep, unified, coherent, clear. On top of that, what you do is you build your messaging, which is the outward-facing, public-facing part of your marketing. And so a lot of the research and a lot of the discovery that you do when you do brand positioning folds itself really nicely into your messaging, because you know who your target audiences are, you know your product, you know your competitors. And so all the things that you would do on your website, on videos, content marketing, social media, that messaging, that storytelling is a direct result of all the work you did when you did your brand positioning.
And it seems like a logical thing that every company should establish. But you said that it's a lot of companies drop the ball on this. How do they drop the ball on brand position?
I think a lot of them make the assumption that, well, there's a couple of ways that they drop the ball. One is that they assume that product is king. And if the product is awesome and it delivers value in their minds, then storytelling is not as important because people will understand what it means to them and why they should buy it. So that's mistake number one. Number two, they pay lip service to brand positioning. They sort of kind of do it. They have these sort of internal focus groups or they have a marketer or two develops brand positioning, and then that's it. That's what they do. And number three is they're ignorant of brand position. They don't understand the value, don't understand the role, and see it, if they see it at all, as a fluffy marketing exercise instead of being something that's fundamental to the OS of a business.
So it sounds like they see it as kind of a flexible thing, or it really shouldn't be. Is that a good assessment? Like it's something that changes, or?
If they see it at all, it's usually regarded as a nice to have versus a must have. So what happens in terms of priorities, and every company's got a list of priorities, it's lower on the pecking order. And especially for early stage companies that haven't scaled yet, the focus is obviously on leads and sales. And the way to get there, or the way they think they should get there, is through tactical execution. Mm-hmm. So they almost skip a step. They skip that brand positioning. In many cases, they skip the strategic planning to get to the tactical execution so they can start generating leads and sales as quickly as possible. It's a misguided view of how you should do business, in my opinion.
And it seems like if you don't have your brand positioning clear, that you're going to be all over the place with your messaging, right? I mean, if you don't know what you really stand for and what your brand is, then how are you, like you said earlier, that everything kind of stems from that, kind of trickles down from that. Well, trickles up, I guess. You said it's kind of the foundation.
Yeah.
But so it wouldn't be as clear. Like, what would it result in that would be a problem for people who are trying to attract if they're not clear?
When you haven't got everybody on the same page, when you haven't done brand positioning, people start telling their versions of the truth. Mm-hmm. So your sales team will go to market emphasizing certain things. Marketing will be talking about other things. Maybe when you're trying to raise money, they're talking about other things. And that causes confusion. It causes your marketing and sales to be incoherent and scattered. And essentially, you're not as efficient in terms of how you tell your story. And then you're competing against companies that have sharp, clear, and compelling messaging and positioning. And you don't operate in isolation. You don't operate in a silo. So, if you're sort of muddling away and telling your story here, this way and that way, and the competition is crystal clear and it's obvious about what they do and why you should work with them, then you're at a competitive disadvantage.
Yeah. I mean, I would think a good example of a company that's super clear on their brand positioning is Apple. It's always kind of the brand. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, Apple is a great example of a company that is clear about its vision, its mission, why it matters, and how it's different. Now, over the years, that Apple difference, the idea that you're part of this tribe, or that you're part of the cool, kind of hip kids when the nerds are using Windows machines and Microsoft, that has kind of dissipated because Apple's a big brand now. But I think to this day, people gravitate to Apple because they've got a story that's different from every other computer company out there, and people feel a connection to Apple. And I think that's part of positioning is really understanding how you can create those strong connections, that because people know who you are and who you stand for and why you matter to them.
Yeah. Can you think of any company in particular that misses the boat, or maybe in the past missed the boat that with their brand positioning? Or
yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, there's lots of examples out there of companies that didn't do it, but I wish I could give you a specific example. But I think that a lot of companies, even those that raised a lot of money, will suffer because their positioning doesn't really set them apart in the marketplace. So they fall into this mushy middle with everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in that space, it's a very dangerous space to be because no one really sees you, despite how much money you'll spend on marketing and sales.
Yeah.
Despite how much money you'll invest in brand, is that if your story isn't clear and loud, then you get lost, and then you start to lose your competitive edge, and then stronger rivals outflank you.
Yeah. It's so tough, even when you have like a good product and, if people don't know about it or don't see that you're different, or you don't talk about an aspect of it that sets you.
Yeah. I mean, I can't talk about a specific company. I will tell you about a particular category, and that would be CRM. Mm-hmm. There are 1,600 CRM companies in the US alone.
Wow.
So everybody from Salesforce and HubSpot at the top of the pack to all these little tiny players. And it doesn't mean that the little tiny players can't compete. It just means that they need to be super clear about why they matter and who they serve. So a few weeks ago, I interviewed a company called Copper, small CRM company. And what they realized is that the original positioning was they were the CRM for anybody who used Google Workspace. And they went to market with that story. If you're on LinkedIn, you'll see their advertising. And what they discovered was, while it was creative and interesting, it didn't work. That even companies that had Google Workspace didn't use Copper. And so they repositioned themselves to serve finance, consultants, and marketing agencies. And that's an example of how you may have to get niche to own a piece of the market, to connect with certain types of customers, mm-hmm. even when you operate in very big competitive markets.
It's like with my copywriting, I had originally targeted like just SaaS, just general, like SaaS companies, small to medium. And it was because I had a copywriting coach who said, they're the ones that have usually the marketing budget to hire an outside copywriter. But I found that it was just so hard to compete. And then I looked at, what is going to separate me? Well, I was a personal trainer for 20 years. I wrote for every fitness magazine. So that's why it was just this past year, I niched down to that. And there's a lot of people in that space even. So I found that out too. There's still a lot of competition, but most don't have my background. Like I used to get people to talk to me for an interview for magazine articles because of my fitness background. I'd have like these fitness experts saying, I'm talking to you because I know you can fill in the gaps. If there's any question about what I'm saying, I don't have to worry about, something being misquoted because I know that you know the stuff. So, that kind of thing. But that's why I niched down, because it's so crazy out there.
Well, you've heard the saying that the niches are in the riches, right? Or the niches are in the riches, depending how you say niche or niche. But, and I received the same advice from a business coach. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, because when you operate in competitive markets, you can't be all things to all people unless you're a Salesforce or a HubSpot and you've got a massive marketing budget and you can appeal to, everybody all the time. But when you're a smaller company and you're fighting for a particular piece of turf, then you got to niche down. You got to be the product for certain types of customers, and you're going to meet their needs to a T, and that's going to make you the obvious choice.
Yeah. You have to really narrow it down. And then also we deal with AI, and there's a lot of AI out there. There's I've experimented with a lot of different platforms, not to write, but to do research and outline and that kind of thing. But there's a lot of them that are promising to do a lot more than that. And so how is it affecting content marketing in general? Is it impacting brand positioning at all? I would imagine
I think it's impacting everything. I'd be lying if I didn't say that it's disrupting every single part of the business world. When it comes to brand positioning, you can certainly put prompts into ChatGPT and get very, very good answers. But again, it's aggregating a whole bunch of different information, and some of it might be on point, but there's how good can the answer be if they're not talking to your customers and your prospects,
right?
And they're not talking to people internally within the organization. So I will not discount ChatGPT as a way to get there, as a tool to get there. But I think there's room for, the human touch, and the powers of creativity and objectivity and research. And the same thing applies to content marketing. I spent a lot of time thinking about this because I spent 15 years as a newspaper journalist, and writing is at the core of what I do professionally. And, it's been almost 2 years since ChatGPT came out, and I don't think you could create content that would be ready for prime time, that somebody would look at that content and go, that's amazing content. Now, there's a lot of prompt jockeys that will tell you that obviously if you're using the wrong prompts and you're not being sophisticated enough, and maybe they're right, I don't know. But I think that there is room for what I call people-powered content. Absolutely. Content that is authentic and that brands will specifically highlight as being people-powered. And I've seen this. I get a newsletter from someone, and they, at the top of the newsletter, says, this is written by me. And I think there's a real branding, positioning opportunity for companies that say, you know what, we're not using ChatGPT. We may use it for some research, but when it comes to creating content, we're going to die on this hill because we believe that people should communicate with people, or something around that theme. Because I still think that people still at this point in time are powerful content machines who can compete with robots in some way, shape, or form. But there's types of content that ChatGPT and generative AI does really, really well. Maybe it's email subject lines or advertising copy or a lot of the grunt work, but there's things that humans do really well too. So I think there's room for both.
Yeah. And I think that I even asked ChatGPT itself this, like, what are some of the pros and cons? And I love asking chat things that puts it against itself. But it said that AI is not a creation, like it doesn't create it. I forget the word it used, but it basically meant, it procures, it finds information and consolidates it and puts it together, but it doesn't create anything new. I think back to way back when I worked in the food business for a long time. And I did recipe development, which very few people know, but I would start my recipe development by looking at what's already been done. And it's kind of the same approach with content. What's out there about this? And then you find where are the gaps, that what has not been done, what has not been said, what is going to set the famous chef Escoffier said, there's no such thing as a new recipe. It's all been done. So I always wonder, part of me says, well, if it's all been done, then chat is, there for that. But then there's always going to be, I always have ideas that I don't see on chat. And when I ask it questions, I'm like, this is dumb. Or this is this has been done so many times before, So, well, how should companies approach AI? I mean, when we say AI, are we mainly talking about ChatGPT or just AI?
No, I think AI. Here's the thing about AI; it's been around for a long time. There's been companies that have been using different forms of AI for decades, and it's only in the last couple of years that AI has become sexy and high profile. But we've been using AI and lots of SaaS tools for a long time. And I think companies should leverage different products that use AI. So, for example, one of the tools that I use on a regular basis is Descript, which is a video editing tool. Essentially, you can upload a video to Descript and then get the transcript and edit your video by using the copy rather than having to edit video clips. Amazing, right? Super amazing, super simple. It's democratized video editing, but it's totally embraces AI to do what it's doing. Another example that you're totally familiar with is Grammarly. That online grammar tool that we use, and I have the premium version because it's so good and it's so necessary. But it's an AI-driven tool. It's learning from all the writing that it ingests, all the good writing and the bad writing it ingests. It's learning from all our grammatical mistakes and all the things that we do well. So, behind the scenes, AI is hard at work powering a lot of these applications. But I think for content, it depends on, at the extreme, there are companies that are just using it outright, create 5 blog posts about X, and they'll just pump it out, and then they publish it. And then, I think somewhere in the middle, there are companies that say, this is a great brainstorming tool, a great way to structure things, a great way to, create frameworks and outlines that will help me write easier, that will help me do research. And so I think there's lots of different approaches, but I think the bottom line is for companies is that, don't be a Luddite. Like, you just cannot, not jump on the AI bandwagon because it's moving so fast. And I think that you'd put yourself at a competitive disadvantage, a massive competitive disadvantage if you didn't use it. Like in our business, if you and I decided, we're going to be AI free. We're not going to use it for anything, not for research, not for grammar checking, not for anything. Imagine how much harder we would have to work than somebody else who's, leveraging the tools on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So
it's almost
that's
hard.
just sort of the way to.
It's almost hard
Go
to
ahead,
avoid.
sorry.
Yeah. Because you put something into Google and AI kicks in. I don't know if it's
right. Yeah. I mean, the thing about it is that the challenging thing for AI and AI tools right now is that it's like being in a candy store, like this giant candy store. And everywhere you turn, there's a new piece of candy that you have to taste. So I get a lot of newsletters about these AI tools, and I read them, and then it's like I'm using this tool and this tool and this tool, and I have this kind of, I don't know if it's an obsession, but I like trying different things, and then you kind of lose track of the things that you really like, So it's hard right now, but I think you just have to embrace it. Just have to dive into the pool and see and then start swimming as hard as you can.
I actually have a list stuck to my computer monitor of all the subscriptions I have, because, if I have a rule to myself is I'm going to try some new software AI. I have to go through like mentally, do I really need it? Is it something I already have? Because, you go on LinkedIn and everyone's like, these are the greatest tools to use. And you try them. And it's like, that is pretty cool. And then it's like $20 a month. And that adds up. It's not like, and you don't get much for free. You almost always have to sign up for something.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just an anecdote. There's this tool that I tried today called Hey Jen. And what it does is that you stand in front of your camera and you talk for 2 minutes. And then the AI captures you talking and your facial expressions and your mouth moving. And then once it has that template, you can feed copy into the AI engine, so written copy into the AI engine, and then it will create a video of you saying those words.
Wow. I think I have heard of it. That's creepy. What did you think? You tried it?
I'm just getting into it. Like the user interface is a little bit bocky right now, but I've seen examples of it, and it's eerily good. Like you can barely tell the difference, but that's how good AI is, and that's how quickly it changes how we do marketing, how we do business.
The scary thing is, whenever something new is developed, there's going to be people who are going to misuse it. If everyone just used it with good intent and for, the right things, it's one thing. But then there's people who are going to create these deep fakes and have people saying things that they didn't say. And I don't know how easy that is. I haven't looked at it because I have no interest in it. But I've heard already on in the news about people who've, been deep faked and celebrities. And I mean, it's just, it's exciting, but it's also terrifying at the same time,
Yeah. I mean, every technology has good actors and bad actors. Everyone thought, for example, that AI would be this force of good and make people more efficient and make us smarter. And there are obviously ways that every technology can go pear-shaped on us. And that's just the way of the world. I mean, it will be interesting to see how governments try to regulate AI and try to control it. But it feels like the genie's out of the box.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping it's like everything else where, there's this huge surge in interest and then it levels off to a manageable level. Like everything's, still in that honeymoon phase or with it. So, but just to switch gears a little bit, there's a lot of interest in, so what you do as a CMO, can you talk a little bit about that? And then Actually, it's a huge segue, right? It's in the
A
difference.
huge segue from AI to, yeah.
We're just going to jump to something completely different. But this is what what you do, and I want to get into that. Because there's a lot of fractional CMOs and people who are calling themselves, fractional, and then fill in the name of the position. So, what is it that you do? Why is there so much interest in people like yourself?
So I branded myself as a fractional CMO about 3 years ago. So it was a marketer doing marketing, because what I found was I was a CMO for many companies, but I was calling myself a marketing consultant, and that wasn't terribly sexy, and it wasn't really attracting the spotlight. And I was looking away to position myself, going back to our original thought, as someone who was different. So I wasn't a digital consultant, and so it was more about me being a part-time CMO to companies, smaller companies who couldn't afford a CMO or didn't want a full-time CMO. And I embraced that title, and that it served me very well. And I work with clients on a part-time basis. It could be a day a week or 2 days a week. And I work with multiple stakeholders within a company. So I'm a part of the senior management team. I'm managing both internal and external resources. So I'm kind of at the best of both worlds. You get a experienced marketer, but you don't have to pay me a full-time salary or stock options or expenses. And so it's a very good way for many, many companies to get what they need when they need it, without, at a cost that serves their needs. Now, what we've seen in the last couple of years, especially in probably the last year, is the fractional bandwagon is rolling faster and faster, and not just for marketers, but for sales, for HR, for finance, I read somebody on LinkedIn who's a fractional community manager. And I think in some respects, it's consultants who have been flushed out of full-time jobs, calling themselves fractional, because it's a lot sexier than calling yourself a consultant. Consultants have there's this connotation that consultants are slick and slimy and polishy, and all we do is we just tell people what to do and we go away. So no one wants to call themselves a consultant these days. And for now, fractional seems pretty sexy. So, but it's on the flip side, it's harder for companies to sort of sift their way through things when everybody's a fractional these days. Like, who is really a fractional? And so I think it's important for companies to understand for marketing, what type of marketer do you need? What kind of skills do they have to have? Because we all have different types of skills. And what kind of experience do they have? And then when you identify those needs, then you can start to slim down who you're going to be considering for the job. But it's a great model for many companies, not for all, but for many companies.
And what's the difference or is there a difference between a fractional CMO and a strategic advisor?
It's a great question. I get that all the time, and sometimes it's hard to provide a clear answer. But I would say that a fractional is embedded in the organization, and they are engaging with multiple stakeholders. They're involved with strategic decision making, managing internal and external resources, probably responsible for budgets and outcomes. So ultimately, the performance of marketing rests on their shoulders. A strategic advisor usually deals with it's a one-on-one or one-to-a-few kind of relationship. They're making strategic recommendations, but they're usually not involved in tactical execution. And at the end of the day, there's somebody else who's responsible for those KPIs, somebody who's going to be held accountable for marketing that does or doesn't work. So for some companies who have executive gap or have a leadership gap, a fractional CMO is a great way to go. And a fractional could cost you anywhere from $4,000 or $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, depending on your budget. Where a strategic advisor, you can start with a strategic advisor at a couple $1,000s or $3,000 or $4,000. It's a lower budget item. Or some strategic advisors are high value because they're really, really good at what they do, but they're less involved. There's less hours involved. They're less engaged. And in many companies, that's all they need. They don't need anything else. They can get whatever they need from that person in a limited amount of time. Simplistic view of the world.
Well, it sounds like what as a copywriter for myself, I limit myself with the number of clients that I work with because I do want to get involved. Like, as you said, I want to immerse myself in that company because the more I know and the more, just the more I know about how everything works, the better my copy will be for them because I'll know, where they're coming from, how they talk, what they stand for, and so on. And it almost sounds like that would be like a fractional CMO. And I do also look at analytics and give advice. So strategic advisor almost sounds like, I hate to say a made up term, but it sounds very generic. Well, there's so much of that. Sometimes I laugh at titles. I go on LinkedIn and I'm like, what is that? People call themselves whatever they want, and so it almost seems like one of those.
Yeah. Well, strategic advisor, you could almost say simplistically, a strategic advisor tells people what they think, and a fractional CMO tells them what they think and what they should do, and then actually helps them actually do it. Okay. So you get somebody who's a lot more immersed in it. But going back to your point about, and this is a good point for a lot of companies who are going to hire a fractional CMO or a strategic advisor or a copywriter, is that to get the best out of a third party, some people like you and I, you have to find someone who's vested, and who believes in what you're doing and is curious about how your product works and your customers and your competitors, and really wants to take a deep dive into your world. And that gives them so much more insight and inspiration than somebody who's just doing the job. Oh, you want an article on this? Oh, sure, I'll write an article on this. I got good writing skills. And when you find those kind of people, if you're a company, if you find those kind of consultants, you keep them, and you don't tell anybody else about them because they're gold. But they're once you get them, they're hard to find. But that's the kind of consultant that I would want to hire.
Yeah. And it's funny because it could work against you if the company is not looking for that. Because I've had people not push against me with that approach, but not be open to really providing me with a lot of information. It's like, how can I help you when I don't really understand everything about, what you stand for? But the ones that I love working with, the ones who are happy to do that. And they're like, here's everything, and you want to talk to our customers? Here's their names, and then it's like, okay, now I can really get into it. Yeah.
I mean, you want to look at consultants as partners.
Yeah.
As opposed to suppliers in an ideal world. Like some consultants they're just very like SWAT teams. They come in, they do the job, they leave. And that's great. And for many cases, that's all you need. But for people like us who want to stick around for a while and want to deliver value on an ongoing basis, a long-term basis, that we want to be partners. We want to be part of your organization in some way. Mm-hmm. We want you to feel like we've got skin in the game and that we care about you and want you to be successful. And if you're successful, then we're successful. And I think that's a very idealistic world of looking at consulting, but it's what I believe, right?
Yeah. And what? It's hard to say, like, I know you're genuine about it and so am I, but I think there's a lot of people who say that, but they don't really walk that talk, and so that's what makes it hard for people who do sometimes,
And I think it makes it hard for companies that hire consultants because they're never quite sure who, what they're getting. They come in skeptical as opposed to excited sometimes. And that's a hard way to start a relationship.
Oh, absolutely. But this has been such a great conversation, Mark. So where can people find you if they want to find out more about you, connect with you?
Well, obviously they can find me on LinkedIn like you. I write a lot of content. I have a lot of things to say. And there's so much going on that it's hard not to write about it.
Yeah.
And then they can check out my website, marketingspark.co. And I've also got a podcast, as we said off the top. It's also called Marketing Spark. I talk to entrepreneurs and marketing leaders. So those are the ways that you can check out what I do. And anybody wants to connect me with LinkedIn, just say that they heard about me on your show and we'll go from there.
That would be great. Yeah, I'll put all those links in the show notes too. So, well, thank you so much, Mark. It's been great. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.